Larry Hoffman, my colleague at HUC downtown, once said that all of theology is autobiography. So I have to begin with autobiography. I became a serious Jew in my second year at McGill University. I come from a small town. I had no Jewish education as a kid. Barely knew anything about Judaism. I had two significant figures in my early life. My father, who was a primitive, superstitious, uneducated Jew who was convinced that if he didn't kiss the mezuzah every time he walked out of the house in the morning, something terrible would happen. He would die, I would die, my mother would die. And if I didn't kiss the mezuzah when I was flying out of Quebec, he turned the car around, brought it back to the house, made me get up, kiss the mezuzah, get back into the car, and drive me to the airport. I had a grandmother, a maternal grandmother from Bukovina, who died when I was in rabbinical school already, but who I was named after her husband, my grandfather, and she was convinced that I was the reincarnation of her husband. Her husband was reborn. He died 6 months before I was born, so somehow his neshama got into me, and she loved me dearly, and she told me stories about Bukovina and about what it meant to be a Jew in Europe. Every Seder, every Purim Seudah, Shabbatot were around her table, and most of my associations as a Jew, which I dropped completely when I went to McGill, stemmed from listening to her and talking to her and sitting around her table. McGill, I became a philosophy major, and everything Jewish went by the board. I came back into Judaism because, and this is familiar to my undergraduates here, there was a young woman whom I was trying to date without success. And she sat next to me in an English poetry class, and one day said to me, "Neil, what are you doing for lunch?" And I said, "Whatever you're doing for lunch." It was the closest I came to having a date. And she says, "I'm going to Hillel." And I said, "Why in the world do you want to do that? Who goes to Hillel?" And she said, "Well, there's a lecture." And I said, "Who's lecturing?" She says, "Will Herberg." I said, "Who's Will Herberg?" "Well, he was a Marxist who became an existentialist and studied Buber and studied Franz Rosenzweig, and he's speaking about a Jewish version of existentialism, and he's selling his book." I said, "Well, Judy, if you want to go hear Herberg, I'll go with you." She didn't know. She died about less than a year ago in London. I never got the date. But I'm convinced that in some crazy kind of way, God, one of the reasons God put her on earth was to get me into that lecture. Because, sorry. I'm going to say much worse things about God in a few minutes. If you're angry now, I might as well sit down. But Herberg changed my life. I was 20 years old, 21 years old. It's the first time that I had heard anything serious said about Judaism and Jewish thinking, but was in any way, I felt in any way relevant, meaningful, interesting, engaging. And I hung around, talked to Herberg, and then began to study. And that led me into rabbinical school, eventually into my doctoral work, and into my teaching. So I guess what I learned from that is one never knows what fortuitous circumstances will influence you and will help you turn a corner.